Okay. Another, I mean, we need to get to chapter one, and we're going to do that even today, but spend maybe 5 minutes talking about this other point. New Testament Greek. It used to be regarded as kind of like its own special spiritual language from the Holy Spirit. They didn't understand why it was so different from, or scholars didn't understand how and why it could be so different from classical Greek, which was really the standard and has been the standard for, hundreds of years, except until very recently. And because the Greek of the New Testament and related to that would be the Septuagint and some other writings, the style and the grammar is sort of cruder, simpler, kind of vernacular or vulgar, to use that word, whereas classical Greek is very stylistically elegant and very literary and very proper. And so everybody wants to imitate that, even though you've sort of passed the age of classical Greek and people are trying to like reconstruct it almost. And then it doesn't sound right. It sort of sounds fake. But so this question really confused people for a long time. I mean, hundreds of years. And it wasn't until later in the 19th century that the logjam was broken and there was new evidence particularly from non-literary texts, the papyri, that would include things like, everyday sorts of notes or like transactions or, don't forget to pick up the laundry at the dry cleaner, things of that nature, and shopping lists or that sort of, very, or letters, but very, just common letters, nothing fancy, nothing rhetorical. And so that became, let's see, where did that come from? I think it was first found in Egypt, where you had, pots discovered with piles of these sort of junk papyri manuscripts preserved in the dry weather of Egypt. And it was like, yeah, in a sense, there's no cash value to it, but in terms of knowledge and science and linguistics, man, it was a gold mine because it basically solved the mystery. I mean, it still took a while for scholars to yield to the new facts, because they're so like enmeshed and entrained in their way of thinking of things. And so it was kind of hard for them to break out of that mold, but eventually that view won the day. And there was a famous scholar named Adolf Deisman. Oh, let me share. Let's see, recording, so that's good. Hopefully you can see that. That's the paper I handed out, and I'm just gonna kind of mention a couple things from it. And this is by way of just quickly giving you a heads up and an answer, a real quick answer, without getting into the details yet. But even, I think it was still in the 19th century, there were scholars who thought of New Testament Greek as sort of the language of the Holy Ghost. But it was this fellow Deisman and his research, he kind of saw some of these manuscripts and realized that this was important and dug into it. And it was really through his work. And there's a few books written by him. I have actually a couple of them, and it's very interesting. You could really spend a lot of time. It would be very, I mean, if you want to get into that, let me know. I can like point you to the right books. Like Light footnote number 1 at the bottom, Light from the Ancient East. I have that book. And I've read some of it, but not all of it. It's pretty thick. And it's very, this is getting very scholarly and specific to a specific problem. So this paper is all about that. And it will be a bit challenging to read this because he refers to the Greek, and sometimes Greek words come up, and it's so do your best. If you're finding it a challenge read, just sort of keep getting through it as well as you can. Glean from it what you can understand, or some of the names, and Deisman's important. There was a guy who resisted for a long time named Nigel Turner. And there's even a little map he gives us. And then he talks about the different dialects. So the question is, in the end, okay, now we know New Testament Greek is the vernacular language of the day. And it's the common Greek. And the Greek word for that is koine, common. So koine Greek, and I just saw that word. It's here a couple places, and you'll see it in this paper. Koine, or it'll be in the Greek, and I have it in my syllabus in the Greek, koine. And it just means common, the common Greek of the day, but that's the official name given to it. So biblical Greeks, likewise, even Septuagint Greek, it's Koine Greek of that period. And so this paper talks about the place of this Koine Greek in the overall context of the Greek dialects, especially of that period. And he enumerates some of the actual linguistic or grammatical differences. How does Koine Greek differ from this dialect or that dialect or classical Greek, and so on. And it's a helpful paper written by Moises Silver for their seminary, Westminster. But what's helpful is at the very end here, he's on the, if you can see this, there is a timeline. And I was going to make my own handout with detailed timeline for you. But on the left is the BC date. And then there are events, and he really kind of refers to language indirectly here. But for example, if you jump down to about 500 BC, it's called the Classical Age. And Classical Greek was really from like 500 BC through like the 400s. Well, until Alexander the Great. Before Classical Greek, there was what's called epic literary or epic literature. Homer, I'm sure you've heard of Homer's Iliad and so on. Homer was earlier, around 800 BC. That's the earliest recorded Greek that's in the Greek alphabet that we have. And so it's, in a sense, its own dialect. It's actually a little easier to learn than Classical Greek. In fact, I'm trying to get into that now myself. Prior to this, though, there's a dialect called Mycenaean Greek, and it's written in a script called Linear B. And I have a standard book on the subject, which you won't be able to see. Can you see it? No, you can't. Okay, sorry about that. Uh-oh. But it's written in a different script that's syllabic. It's not even alphabetic. And it goes back to the 1400 BC. It's much more ancient, and they were actually wiped out for a while, so that there was kind of a dark ages, and then Greek kind of re-emerged And they instead of using this writing system, but it was syllabic syllables, they adopted the alphabetic system of writing from the Phoenicians and modified it to their own use. And that's another long story. But anyway, so there's this development historically of Greek going back to like the Bronze Age. And so classical Greek is not the earliest form of Greek that we have or know about, but it is sort of the golden age. And but around, Alexander the Great conquered around, like when he died, like 330 BC. So in the 4th century, Alexander conquers the whole Near East all the way into India, Afghanistan. It's like crazy. And as a result, he spread Greek culture or Hellenistic culture. And so there's this Hellenization of the entire world, in effect, through Alexander the Great. And Greek at that point is not classical Greek. We call it Hellenistic Greek, Greek of the post-Alexander period. And Koine Greek, when we talk about Koine Greek, we're talking about the vernacular of Hellenistic Greek. So we're talking about later Greek starting, maybe 300 BC or as early as that, or 250. The Septuagint started around 250 and going all the way through to, the 1st century AD and beyond. Okay, so that's just a quick rundown, and maybe we'll talk about that more another time. Any questions on that? Or we drop it and move on. Okay, very good.
But Koine is sort of the vulgar vernacular. Was there a
Yes.
sort of a more literary variant of it as well?
Well, a couple things. There was a kind of what they would call literary Koine. So a kind of a nice Koine that was used in more literary productions. Not just junk text, graffiti, and so on. And there was a kind of what do you want to call it? Archaizing or classicizing, kind of imitation of classical Greek by a lot of writers, but I don't think there's something else. Let me think. Yeah.
So like even like the philosophical texts of the time would have been in like just straight up Koine.
No. Well, like Plato and Aristotle would be more classical.
Right. I mean, but that's like still that's a little before.
Right. Yeah, let's see. Well, I think some of these ones, let's see, I'm trying to think of a good example.
Well, I mean, but like what about like so like the Septuagint? That's is that Koine or like in the same
That is
level?
Koine. Yeah. And it's heavily influenced, it's sort of like translation Greek, because at least especially certain parts of it, the historical parts are kind of just sort of transmitting the Hebrew. So it almost you feel like you're reading the Hebrew, but in Greek.
Like reading the
Proverbs,
New American Standard.
yeah, yeah. Proverbs is a much more free translation into Greek, but I would say, yeah, it's Koine at that point.
Hmm.
There are certain writers, I'm trying to think of who would I pick out. I'm not sure, like maybe Plutarch, I think is a name, who were tried to stylistically imitate classical Greek, but came across like they kind of failed. They tried and they just sound artificial. Um,
Interesting.
yeah, I can keep my eye open. Maybe there's a better answer for that question. I mean, there's some interesting writers like Arrian from the 1st century AD who wrote, and I have it you can get a lot of these Greek writings in the Harvard Loeb Classical Library. Can you see this?
Yeah, I've got a couple volumes of.
Yeah, and
those,
I'll maybe refer to this as Herodotus, and there's 2 volumes that are written by Arrian, and he's giving a history of Alexander the Great and all the different stories about him. And it's great reading, and it's not that the Greek isn't really all that hard, but it's not classical, and it doesn't seem to me to like it was trying to imitate it. Apostolic Fathers would be from mainly 2nd century, and it's Koine.
Yeah, it's just I guess it seems weird to me that like it took the discovery of the papyri to sort of clue them into like, oh no, this is just the vernacular, when like, when there's these other sources available as well.
Yeah. There was the rare scholar here and there. There was a guy named Lightfoot who suggested that it's probably just the vernacular before he had all this evidence. So there were some, bright scholars who weren't just led astray by the bias of the period. Thucydides, yeah, he's really pre-Hellenistic, and he's a bit hard to read in Greek. Herodotus, which I've been trying to read, he has his own kind of style or dialect. Xenophon would be, yeah. Actually, when
Yeah,
I
those are all
first,
classical, yeah.
yeah, I took classical Greek at Cornell, and then the teacher suggested, like, for further reading, why don't you read Isocrates? And he's listed here. Oh man, it was so hard. It was like he was an orator from around, yeah, like 400 BC. And I can remember spending a week trying to get through one page. And it was just so hard because the word order is different, and you've got to like figure out what connects with what, and it's just, oh, very hard. So classical Greek is difficult unless you spend time with it. And I was going to share with you a bunch of, there are tons and tons of Greek grammar books available these days, and there's some good ones for classical Greek. And I was going to mention all those things to you, but another time. Any other questions? Okay, we're making good progress. Well, why don't we, I'm going to turn to chapter 1 of Croy. And of course, I've taken up all the time. It's amazing how fast the time goes by. But let's begin talking about the alphabet and the writing system. We have a little bit of time left. And maybe we'll just carry this over as an assignment for next time to internalize, learn, and memorize the alphabet, including the order, because the order of the letters is important when you're looking up words in a dictionary. And I have to say, I had it all memorized, and then you forget after years. But we're going to spend a few minutes here looking at the pronunciation, and then a couple other things about the writing system. But just to give you a heads up, section 5, starting on page 3, about accents. That's very important to me. I think we need to learn the rules about where accents go. There's an acute accent, a grave accent, and a circumflex accent. And it's no big deal. It's not really that hard, but for some reason, a lot of seminaries decided, oh, this is too hard. They can't learn this. And so they just drop it. And it does students a disservice, because then from then on forever, you are like intimidated by it because you've been told it's hard. and you don't really know how to pronounce Greek properly. And sometimes it's significant in terms of meaning. And so you're just handicapped. It's foolish. So we're gonna do what we have to get accent. Okay. Have either of you had a chance to actually work on the alphabet?
Yes.
Oh,
I mean, I've learned it somewhat before, so it's all very
okay.
familiar.
Well, before I actually do a rundown of the alphabet on page 1, if you could turn to page 5. And at the top, under section 7, there are exercises, and then there's these 2 passages, one from the LXX, which is the Septuagint. And we'll talk more about the Septuagint, but there is a nice section 8 just talks about it. So that'll help you understand what the Septuagint is. And then there's a passage from John 1 from the New Testament. Mike, well, Alessio, do you feel like
Yes.
you can pronounce Greek?
Yeah, I
Okay.
mean I've been in that one online program that I mentioned for a while, but it's like I mentioned, it's do it at your own pace. And so not gonna lie, I've kind of stagnated the last couple months. But
Sure.
I did get some practice in with reading Greek, at least phonetically, although I can catch a lot of these vocab words, but I'm still really, really new to a lot of the grammar and
Yeah.
everything.
I don't mean actually understanding and translating, and I
Yeah,
just
but at
mean
least like phonetically.
phonetically, you see the letters and you can pronounce it, even though you have no idea what you're reading.
Pretty much, yeah.
Speaking in tongues.
Yeah.
Well, let's do this just for fun. It'll help me kind of get a
Sure.
sense of how bad things are. And it's kind of let's give you a chance to interact here.
Sure.
So why don't we do this? There's, let's see, 1 sentence, 2 sentences, 3 sentences, 4 sentences. Of course, I could take one, but I'll be lazy and I'll let you guys do it. So let's alternate.
Sure.
Mike will start. Just read one sentence to the first period, which is logos, and then Alessio will take the second sentence and we'll go back and forth. So you'll each do 2 sentences.
Are we doing the one from Genesis or John 1?
Let's do John 1 because it's a little
John 1?
shorter and I think it's probably easier.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mike, when you feel
All right.
you can do it.
All right. It's like I said, it's gonna be really, really halting and awkward.
Should we keep recording or should we turn it off? We'll keep it on.
All right.
Posterity.
En arche ein ho logos kai ho logos ein proston theon kai theos ein ho logos.
Very good. That's excellent. Wow, this is so much easier and faster than Hebrew.
Yeah.
And like a month working on Hebrew alphabet and people would still have trouble. Yeah, maybe not ho logos, but ha logos, like a short ha. Okay, that was excellent. All right, Alessio, take it from there. Sentence number 2.
Sweet. Hutas ein en arche pros ton theon, ponta diatu egenito. How far do you want me to go?
Oh, let's see. We passed one
I
period.
just finished the sentence. I'll take the last one.
Oh,
Yeah.
there we go.
So keep going to the period of this.
Okay. Ponta diatu egenito kai choris autu egenito ude ten.
Yes. And I would say agenita.
Oh, egenita. Okay.
Yeah, not omega, but omicron. Again, not agenito. Kai
Again,
Kai chorus, not chorus, but chorus.
chorus. Okay.
At least that's the way I would do it.
Yeah.
Okay. Mike, finish her up.
Okay. Gegonen and auto Zoe and Kai Hey Zoe and to Sos? I don't know. Tone.
Fos.
What's that?
Fos.
Okay. Anthropon. Anthropon.
Yes. Phoston anthropon. Cool. So I'm going to jump in here and comment a little bit. If you go back, if we look up on the Septuagint text portion, that starts out en arche epoiesen hatheas ton uranon kai ten gain. And what's kind of cool here is you see how both of these passages, Genesis 1 and John 1, begin with NRK, in the beginning. And okay, so this is like another reason to learn the original language, because you're seeing a verbal parallelism or citation even, where John 1 is clearly kind of like calling your attention to Genesis 1 and saying, hey, there's like parallel here. We're going actually before that beginning to like another beginning, but it's the same concept. You know, we're talking about in the beginning. So that's kind of cool.
I like too. It's like hatheos in Genesis and halagos, like right there. I mean that adds another dimension there to it of just like, oh, God is right there, and then the word is right there, in almost exactly the same spot.
I'm going to read a bit more from the Septuagint. Heidege ein oratos kai akatasgeuastos.
Dang.
Katas epanotes abusu. And there abusu is abyss, the deep.
Oh, I see.
But note, this is where it says, and the earth was without form and void, or one translation. But notice how it says, heidege ein oratos. I was just talking about the aorist tense.
Oh.
That's an adjectival form of basically the same word, oratos.
Interesting.
Which is kind of like saying without form. Like, yeah, it's not specifying. There's no boundaries. It's kind of amorphous. So,
gotcha.
Okay, we're about to stop. I wanted to mention, because I pulled out a whole bunch of books to show you, but in the chat, I just wanted to mention a couple things. One was there's a book that's rather thick and new by this guy, Paragunis. It's excellent book. I'm just kind of starting in it, but it's about the development of Greek historically. So that whole issue of like, where does Koine fit into the dialect and the history of Greek? This book, you know, it gets into it in infinite detail. So he talks about the phases of the Greek language, and then different, you know, parts of the grammar, and then the New Testament itself. And it's more than you want right now, but someday you might find it interesting if you've got the money. And then the second book by this guy von Siebenthal is what you would call a second year grammatical reference book. So now you've learned first year Greek, and now you're reading Greek, and you're looking at a sentence and the syntax, the structure of it raises certain questions in your mind, like, can you use the accusative that way? Or Does the infinitive go with like you have these questions about kind of like syntax? That's now, and there's always been second year grammar books like that. I've got some older ones which are great. They're smaller and they're very good too. And someday we'll talk about that. But this is like now the recent standard. It's really good. And so I mentioned that. Of course, it's expensive. But I just thought you should know about it. And one more.
Honestly, for an academic book, that's not so bad at all.
Yeah, and it is paperback, and it's and it's man, these are like 500-page books at least. Then we're talking about the Septuagint and learning how to read it. Just to let you know, there is an edition, if you will, of the Septuagint, the Greek Old Testament, in one volume. Here it is. That is bilingual. It's dual. It has, I probably can't show you, but
Yeah, it's a little blurry.
in the middle here is Greek, and on the ends, the end columns are English.
Interesting. That's cool.
So there is a kind of a standard critical edition that's like the official thing, but this is really useful. I used to, at seminary, between a couple of classes, I had an hour free, and I would just say, oh, I'm going to read the Septuagint on my own. And I would just go in the library and sit there and use this book. And I would cheat, basically, because I didn't have time to like do it properly where I'm learning. I didn't have a list of vocabulary from the Septuagint at that time. You can actually get more help now, but and I would just try to read the Greek, and if I couldn't get it, I would just look over at the English and kind of work backwards and say, okay, I guess that's what the Greek word means. Okay, great. And then actually I learned new vocabulary because I would see it over and over again. And I just started to get comfortable with the Septuagint doing this. But I recommend it. It's fun because you can just cheat and look over at the English, and you're reading like not the New Testament now. I'm reading the whole Old Testament. And I've read I don't think I've read parts of it are really easy, like Genesis through Kings. But when you get into Proverbs or Isaiah or Psalms and stuff like that, then it starts getting kind of like, oh, this is like free-flowing Greek and I can't figure it out. Okay, we're gonna stop there. I went over time, which is not what I wanted to do, but thanks for your patience. Any questions? So we're kind of behind, but that's okay. And we're gonna come back to chapter 1 next week.
Come back to it.
Yeah, because we want to, and you may need to reread that chapter and try to memorize vocabulary, including the order, so you can look up words in the dictionary. And then also make sure you read or reread the section on accents, among other things, because I'm going to exercise you on that.
Sounds good.
I'm not the nice guy. I'm not the nice professor when it comes to accents. I'm like no work, no cheating. No, you are going to learn every single rule about the accents. I'm a pendulum swing the other way. So.
My question is on how do we handle how do you pronounce the letters? Are we pi or p?
Oh yeah, we do. Yeah, Erasmian or reconstructed.
It's kind of like a reconstructed form. It's an attempt to, it's kind of like a, what do I want to say? There is a good book on how did they pronounce ancient Greek? But then if you actually try to follow that, then you've got to pronounce like phi P. You like you have to do
Yes.
this weird aspirated thing, and it's impossible to do properly.
Yeah, I was wondering. I've seen that. I was wondering how much of that was like sheerly for classical and had sort of been like had those corners rounded off by the time we got to Koine, or
Right, and that's a nuanced question which I don't have a good answer for.
I'm just kind of just saying, where are we standing eyes on here? Or is it phi or phi or pi or p or
Well, let me do a quick rundown. And this is where I failed today because this is like main thing we should have covered, but I talked too much. Yeah, at the end of the alphabet, you have these compound consonants, which we're going to pronounce as fricatives. So it's going to be phi, he, or ki, and psi. And the P in the C is not silent.
Mhm.
Other consonants are pretty much, well, we may need to come back to zeta because I was taught to pronounce zeta as DZ, z, always. But actually, as he says, much of the time you actually pronounce it as z, no D. It's only when it's, I think, like at the beginning of a word or kind of like not between vowels, but so I'm going to double check that because I'm not convinced. What else? Kappa, lambda, mu, nu. Oh, right. Then there's this xi, which is kind of in the middle of the list there, like pronounced like fox. So that's a compound consonant. It's x, like ks. And what else? I haven't when the R consonant rho, I've never really heard any explanation that says it has to be trilled or rolled like in Spanish. Like you don't have to do that. Sigma is just S, P, tau, epsilon, omega. Now the vowels are like European vowels, not like English vowels. So we have alpha, which can be long or short, but it's when we say a vowel is long or short, we're talking about quantity, how long you hold it, versus changing the nature of the sound, the quality of it. So alpha can be ah or ah. Epsilon is a short E, we would say eh or eh. Iota is I or yeah, I or I. Although you tend to say yeah, police it. Yeah, they're pronouncing it with a bit of a qualitative change. So E. Long iota would be E. Omicron is contrasted with omega. So Omicron is like ah. So you guys were tending to pronounce Omicrons like omegas, a little bit too much like an O, more like ah. And epsilon can be long or short. But it's, yeah, upsilon is interesting. It's sort of like, it's often transliterated into Y in various languages. So it's ooh, ooh. It's not it's like a ooh sound. So you kind of round your lips. But that's a bit of a detail. That's like, you'll see when you're actually looking at words, it's not that weird. And then omega is O, like our long O. Omega Man. Okay, that'll give you the basics of what you need, and we'll come back probably next time. I hope other students return. We'll see. And we need to talk about diphthongs because that's important. So we're not really done with pronunciation.
Hmm.
And then we're gonna
Every year they like memorize one person on each year.
yeah, we're gonna do the exercises to some degree, but in some way I want us to drill on the alphabet. So be prepared for me to call on you and to have you recite the alphabet
Sounds
Cool.
good.
and maybe forwards and backwards. I mean, some classes they make up a song and because it's so hard, but I'm just like, forget it. Just memorize it. And you have your own methodologies for reviewing and just repeating to yourself. And I just as a tip as well, at some point in all my language learning from Hebrew and Greek and other languages, I realized that I was spending, I could waste a lot of time making my own flashcards. I could spend the whole semester making these perfect flashcards and never getting it in. I have it on paper and cards, but not in my head. So I tended to develop a kind of a technique where I'd use like maybe an index card and just use the book and cover what I need to cover and constantly use the book as my kind of like my flashcard system. So I didn't have to write anything and waste that time. I was constantly trying to just get my mind to repeat, constantly reviewing in my head. So it was written in my brain cells. And so that is something I want to warn you about. Like I would not recommend making flashcards of the alphabet. That's kind of not a good use of your time, if you can help it. But, you know, a pad of paper and a pen and just practicing writing it, because writing is another medium, another way of helping you remember. Saying it out loud is another way of remembering it. Maybe a little bit of a song would help. But so multimodal learning is a good idea. And there are other tricks and techniques about memorizing, which we can talk about if we need to.
Right.
Okay. We'll just stop there. I'll let you go. We went way over, but thanks for your time.
Thank you, Scobie.
And see you next week if we can
All
keep
right. Take care.
Thanks, Kobe.
See ya.
Catch y'all later.
Yep.